since we had the Asian parent, we were able to very cheaply target thousands of people with surveys. So what I did for the first 3-4 months was data collection, running survey after survey, building theses on brand concept and testing it in all the different markets we were in, doing little focus groups, inviting people into the office, asking them, hey, what do you think about this brand name? What do you think about this color? And yeah, I didn't think it would make sense to hire a branding agency. So far in this region, I've not been very impressed by them. And I think I want it to be something that's different from what's already in the market. And I think the guys here are not very data driven. They just work on experience, which then means, again, you're not going to come up with something that's different than what's already in the market.
This is the eCommerce in Southeast Asia podcast with Matthew Shoney, session number 5. Let's get started.
Welcome to the eCommerce in SE Asia podcast, where it's all about understanding and winning e-commerce in Southeast Asia. And now your host, Matthew Shoney.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'm very excited to welcome this week's guest, Duri Granziol. Duri is the founder and CEO of Mama's Choice, one of the best DTC brand building success stories in recent years of Southeast Asia e-commerce. Prior to starting Mama's Choice in 2018, Duri was the CEO at Lazada Indonesia and CCO at Lazada Philippines after spending 4+ years at BCG. Duri, welcome to the show, and thanks for taking the time to speak with me.
Thanks so much for having me, Matthew. Great to be on this podcast.
Awesome, man. So let's start with the basics. And I kind of ask everyone this. What led you to Southeast Asia, and more specifically, Southeast Asia e-commerce?
Yeah, so I came sort of by accident over here to Southeast Asia. I was in Boston Consulting back then, and they had this exchange program. I applied for a few locations and in the end got allocated Hong Kong, which is more like North Asia. But then the Hong Kong office basically rented me out to Southeast Asia, and I really liked it down here. And after a year, I looked for options to leave BCG and stay in Southeast Asia, and got into contact with Rocket Internet. They had a lot of jobs on their platform in Southeast Asia. And by coincidence, actually, one of my coworkers in BCG had a wife who was already working for Lazada, and got me introduced to a couple of folks at Lazada management. And yeah, I had a few chats, and I was fascinated by this world of startups. I didn't really look into startups before at all. I was an e-commerce user myself, and I was like, wow, this is really cool being here in the beginning of e-commerce in this region and being able to stay here and start something cool. And that's how the whole thing happened.
What year did you start Lazada, and what was kind of the environment like when you were just getting moving?
It was 2014. So it was a bit after everything was set up, but it was still very early stage. We still didn't really know the business model. It was very much a Rocket Internet company, according like it's how it in the book in Blitz Scaling, right? It's really was a lot of young kids who did a lot of quick and dirty fixes and had a lot of money to spend, and just went super aggressive on everything they did in business and also in partying. So it was a really early stage startup culture with a lot of very driven people, and good money and good drive, really like it's described in Blitz Scaling.
We crossed paths around that time I was there in Lazada, and it was, I think Blitz Scaling is the right way to phrase it. It was intense. It was moving very, very fast, but that's because I think like the energy was really special. We knew that we were working on something really big, and the potential to be not even a unicorn, a deca unicorn, was kind of in people's minds. So it was, really interesting. And the network that came out of that Rocket Internet community is still all over Southeast Asia. It's pretty hard, jumping into a conversation with a brand organization or an agency or even a larger startup that doesn't have someone that was connected in some way to that Rocket Internet ecosystem back then. So it's a small world, definitely in Southeast Asia. But, so you were like deep in the world of Indonesia as the CEO of Lazada Indonesia. And then you stepped away to start Mama's Choice in 2018. What led you to start Mama's Choice and launch your own brand?
When we got acquired in Lazada by Alibaba, I had the opportunity to spend quite some time in China and go talk to some very early stage members of the Alibaba company. And some of these guys really told me interesting stuff on how the ecosystem developed there. And what I found the most interesting was who really profited from the whole evolution of e-commerce there. And it was really the factories and guys who built their own brand and went straight to consumer and basically used all that infrastructure that Alibaba and its competitors back then built and offered them for almost free, right? And that's what really, there was a lot of wealth created. There was a lot of brands that basically didn't exist before Alibaba and then became pretty big and billion-dollar companies. So I found that really interesting. And I felt it was the same stage in Southeast Asia now, where there's still a lot of competition between the e-commerce players. So you can get their infrastructure for almost free and then build something based on that. That's what I wanted to do. And then I met by coincidence the founder of The Asian Parent, which is Roshni Matani, the biggest parenting platform in Southeast Asia. And we were discussing if I could become an advisor and help her with investors and so on. And they were discussing whether she should open an e-commerce business. And I was like, no, that makes no sense. Niche e-commerce plays in a category that all the big players care about too. Makes no sense. It's very hard competition, but we could build our own brand. And that's basically how we then together decided to build a brand for mom and babies, using also the background that she already had, using the information from the biggest parenting website and biggest parenting app in the region to basically make product development much easier and then also have a channel to create awareness with. That was basically how it was built, yeah.
So you had the community to feed product development and to, help you get started on things at the very beginning. So when you, how did you get started? What was the first couple of months with Mama's Choice? Did you get a creative agency, a branding agency? Did you come up with a name yourself? How did you guys tackle building a brand? And has it pivoted, evolved, quite a bit? Or have you kind of been able to stick to your roots, since 2018?
Yeah, I think that's also interesting how this came about. But yeah, as you said, we had a community already, right? And for me, it was very clear. I'm not a parent myself, and our brand is selling products for mom and babies, right? It had to be very data driven. And I felt I could make it an advantage that I actually don't have a personal opinion on all these things because I'm not a consumer myself. So I was always very clear. It had to be very data driven. I also told Roshni, you are not the relevant customer. You're the top 1%, right? So your opinion is interesting, but it needs to be data driven and we need to base it on data for our target audience, right? And since we had the Asian Parent, we were able to very cheaply target thousands of people with surveys. So what I did for the first 3-4 months was data collection, running survey after survey, building theses on brand concept and testing it in all the different markets we were in, doing little focus groups, inviting people into the office, asking them, hey, what do you think about this brand name? What do you think about this color? And yeah, I didn't think it would make sense to hire a branding agency. So far in this region, I've not been very impressed by them. And I think I wanted to be something that's different from what's already in the market. And I think the guys here are not very data driven. They just work on experience, which then means, again, you're not going to come up with something that's different than what's already in the market. I talked to a lot of experts on the way, like creative designers who would tell me a few things about what to consider when we choose a color or a brand logo. I talked to a lot of people that were into brand management and branding in big FMCG companies and got sort of downloads from them. But yeah, we did everything in-house, basically. We just consulted experts.
So Duri, you launched in Indonesia. What were some of the first products? Did you just go with one cornerstone product and one sales channel? How did you come up with which products you're going to launch and which sales channels to adopt?
So the strategy was really to go in some niches where we felt it was easier to enter and then go into more competitive categories later on. So we were looking at the needs for mothers that were currently unmet and trying to find a better solution for that, right? So we actually started with fluoride-free toothpaste for pregnant women because fluoride, as you might know, fluoride in bigger quantities is very poisonous, but it's obviously also good for your teeth. But during pregnancy, you're especially sensitive to a lot of chemicals. So a lot of people recommend to use a fluoride-free toothpaste during pregnancy. And there wasn't one on the market here yet in Southeast Asia. So we developed that and also alcohol-free mouthwash. It didn't have fluoride. It had a few extra things for sensitive gums during pregnancy. The flavor was especially made for the more sensitive taste bud of pregnant mothers. However, that didn't work very well. So our third product, which we sort of developed in parallel, was stretch mark cream. There was already a lot of products in the market, but we did some research and we realized there was a trending ingredient, which is aloe vera, which none of them had yet. And there is a special need in Southeast Asia or in warm countries that when the skin expands under stretch marks, the mothers here get very itchy skin, and that happens mostly in warm territories. And most stretch mark creams on the market didn't really take that into account. So we added in aloe vera and basically said it's going to work for the itchy skin, which everybody knows aloe vera helps to calm the skin. So we really had like a USP that nobody else had in the market yet. And that product then really took off. And I would say within like 6 months, we were the market leader online in that category.
That's really interesting. And so let's talk about the production side. You manufactured everything initially in Indonesia, or were you running around the factories, or you had set up a team that was looking after the quality control and the sourcing that was doing that for you?
No, that was actually simpler than I envisaged it to be. So I basically went and looked at who is manufacturing for all the reputable brands in Indonesia. I wanted to manufacture in Indonesia because that was our first core market, and FDA approval processes would be much easier if we manufacture locally. So it was given that we're going to start manufacturing locally. Then I realized basically all the Unilevers, P&Gs, and everybody basically has outsourcing providers there as well. They have factories that are owned and operated by third parties. And I basically just went to these guys and I said, hey, I want this and this product. Can you manufacture it for me? And in the beginning, they wouldn't really believe me but it helped that my credentials from Lazada and so on. And I could show them that we have money on our bank account. And then they started entertaining the thought of it. And I didn't need to spend so much time on quality control and these things because I already knew these guys were also producing for Unilever and P&G. So they were inspected. They knew what they were doing. I just added in another safety level by having all the products shipped to Singapore and doing extra tests there in a third-party lab. And I did that with the samples already. And I did it during production process to make sure that there is no big issue. And it's also one of our brand promises. We always independently test and we add an extra step of security. But generally, our manufacturers were already very skilled in those processes.
That's super interesting. It almost sounds too good to be true. Like, did you face any challenges or big hurdles that you didn't really forecast when you were getting up and moving?
Interestingly, in the beginning, not so much. We were in a way lucky that some of the problem that came up much later. So the first 3 products, even the FDA process was relatively smooth. I think it was also because it was the beginning of COVID and people were somehow quite nice to us everywhere. We had much bigger problems with the FDA later on. We had much bigger problems with the manufacturers later on. But in the beginning, it was quite smooth sailing. Then later on, I had to do a product recall and I had products that got denied by the FDA for several months and I had to reformulate them and so on. But in the beginning, we didn't really have that.
So another question, what do you think is critical to building a brand? Mama's Choice definitely has, very strong brand loyalty sentiment in your community. Is there anything that you would say is unique in Southeast Asia for brand building compared to your background in Europe and US before you moved here?
No, not really. What I think is I've always set out to build a proper FMCG brand and not sort of, an Amazon seller. So I always set out to build the brand how you would build a proper big brand, right? We did a lot of content marketing. We spend over 50% of our marketing in upper funnel that doesn't directly convert. So ROI is not my key metric on a lot of the marketing. It's really about brand awareness and brand perception. Because my logic is I need to make the funnel very broad on top. And then I can have a much better numbers in the lower funnel where I optimize for purchase, right? So that's different to what most people did in the region. And I think it works very well in the region because people here, and that's maybe now the difference, people here are not so much preoccupied with the history of a brand, right? They don't really care if something was founded 1915 in Paris or in London or whatever, right? It's something that still has a bit of weight here, but not the same as in Europe. So, or the US. So here, when you bring up something fresh and you do content marketing for a year or so, then when I talk to people now, they're like, oh, what? Your brand is only 4 years old? I thought it's like 20 years old. And they all think it's a brand that's from their market, e.g. from Indonesia or from the Philippines. They don't really care whether it's a big international brand. They care about the things they experienced in the last 2 years, right? And when you do real brand marketing, a lot of awareness level marketing, then you can really get this brand recognition. And they don't really differentiate you, oh, this is a young online brand versus, oh, this is a P&G brand that has been there for the last 100 years. While I think in the West, you have much more this historical perspective and people are sort of comparing brands like this. Yeah, but this is new. This is just a few kids doing something. I would say in Indonesia or the Philippines, if you're there, if you're present online, people don't really say, oh, this is a small modern brand and this one is a traditional brand. They don't really do this differentiation.
How did you pick your sales channel mix? Did you go all marketplace at the beginning? Did you go marketplace plus DTC plus social? Did you go B2B wholesale? How did you kind of, frame and approach that and phase it?
Yeah, for me, it was very clear that we need to use the marketplaces because from what I learned in China, like I always compare it to, you have a small store on the side of the road and in the middle of the road, there's a huge mall where all the roads leads to and there's a lot of parking space and whatever, right? Nobody will come to your small little store if they don't know about your brand. And I felt that applies to the online world as well. Like you gotta be in the big mall. So we always did big marketplaces plus our own website, right? And then basically we compared cost of conversion. So e.g., how much do we spend on marketing and what's our cost after to convert in terms of commissions and so on, and which channel is better, right? So we were basically agnostic on the online channels and we just looked at purely financially what's working out better for us, right? And given that Lazada and Shopee and all these guys are still sharing a lot of data with you and you can run Facebook ads with conversion signals via collaborative ads, the online marketplaces were just a lot cheaper per conversion than our own site, because on your own site, people have to set up a new credit card. They have to do the logistics and address setup. It just leads to a much lower conversion rate. And if you take all costs in, it's cheaper to convert Shopee and Lazada. So our sales channel mix is still a lot of Shopee and Lazada, but obviously these guys are increasing their commissions and that makes us invest more in our own D2C again. And we're getting more loyal customers that already know about our brand. So they're more willing to go to our own website. So now they're like maybe willing to take an extra drive to go to the little store on the side of the road. And that's basically what we're doing, right? We're switching channels a bit around or moving it gradually from one to another. Offline, e.g. B2B, also via distributors, we start only once we have a very good market penetration online, which we have, for example, in Indonesia, where it becomes a play to be always there when the consumer makes a purchase decision. And there's just a lot of unplanned purchases where people are in a mall or in a department store and they buy a few other things and then they see, okay, I need the stretch mark cream too. So now we're trying to be on these points of conversion as well. I wouldn't say we fully arrived there yet. We're still working on that. But yeah, there we run now. We have own stores in very high frequency location. And we work with a distributor to have a broad coverage in smaller stores.
Ah, that's interesting. So you've expanded and you own your own retail stores in some of the markets as well. Did I understand that correct?
Yeah, but very experimental. We had 2 stores. Now we have again only 1. And we might open a second one again. So very, and only in Indonesia. We're still trying to find out the right strategy on that. We're learning and we're observing and we're improving and might roll it out on a bigger scale at a later point.
So you mentioned earlier that you would consider yourself a little bit unique because you focused on more top of funnel in your advertising mix, content marketing, broader reach, awareness type activities. How has that evolved in the past 4 years? TikTok's popped up. I think Creator was big in 2018, but it's still, I'd say maybe it's even bigger now. What's happened with your acquisition mix over these past 4 years?
I would say in the last year or so, we started investing much more in TikTok, right? I think a lot of people are talking about TikTok stealing market share from Shopee because they've been very aggressive in Indonesia. But I think the bigger move is marketing budget going from Facebook to TikTok, right? Because TikTok, as far as I see it, especially for non-impulse purchase categories and for categories where your customers are not teenagers, it's not a great conversion channel yet. It might become, but what it is a very cheap awareness channel, right? Just as an example, right? Your organic reach for your content can be much bigger than the number of your followers. While on Facebook, I have around 500,000 followers on Facebook and on TikTok, right? On Facebook or e.g. Instagram, I can get maybe 5% of my total followership to see one of my posts organically. On TikTok, if I'm lucky, I can get 10x of my followers see the post organically, right? And then with spend, you can, in most countries, it's actually very interesting. We see different trends in different countries. But in most countries, you can get much cheaper reach on TikTok than on Instagram or Facebook. So yeah, we've moved a lot of top of the funnel marketing to TikTok. I think another thing there to also consider is that basically the type of content you use to advertise on TikTok versus you use on Instagram and Facebook. So Instagram and Facebook still favor a bit more professionally produced content, which means you have nice editing, nice lighting, you have professional recording and so on. While on TikTok, that kind of content really doesn't work. It's really creator based content, user generated content that's quite basic recording just from a phone, very minimal editing, just some captions on and some basic effects. And the type of person even you use is like a everyday person. It's not really a big celebrity that you use. It's also kind of made it much more affordable and efficient to produce a lot of content because you can basically just ask your followers and your brand fans and evangelists to do content. While on the Facebook, Instagram ecosystem, you still need a bit more professional content to be successful.
How many markets are you in right now, Duri? Are you in all 6 Southeast Asian markets?
Only in 5 right now. So Vietnam, we're still setting up.
And how did you go about kind of the legal entity setup operations? I think that might be interesting to some of the audience. Did you go and set up an entity in each of the markets, or did you work with partners and look at JVs and use enablers or anything like that?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question, right? And that was also a big challenge, and it's also a bit of a competitive mode. So we were looking at just setting up in one country and then doing cross-border, right? Shopee allows cross-border sales now, and it has a pretty decent system for it. But the problem is the transportation cost, tax cost, and everything if you want to do cross-border for the type of products that I have, which are below $10 US. It's just not economical because they add like $3-4 of cost to an order, let's say from Indonesia to Singapore. The delivery lead times would be okay. It's like 3-4 days, but the cost is just prohibitive. And also in the algorithm, it's sort of the international listings don't really get prioritized. And I think even users might just not click much on them because they have a lot of bad experiences with the sellers from China. So it was pretty clear after a while that cross-border isn't working and we need to be local in each market. We went the route that we set up an entity in each market. It was rather painful, but we also, again, like the marketing, we invested long-term and we wanted to build a proper brand in the region. And it's totally worth it. Once you have the setup, you can really do a lot of things that you wouldn't be able to do with partners or cross-border. So yeah, we set up in each country. However, we used fulfillment partners in each country, right? We didn't want to take care of warehouses and these kind of things ourselves. So we have fulfillment partners in each country. So we don't do fulfillment ourselves. We just have an entity to be able to import and sell and to hire our own people, but we do not take care of fulfillment in the market itself.
Interesting. So I always ask our guests this one. If you could give just one piece of advice to e-commerce startups, building a brand and trying to take it to the top of search, either in a marketplace or outside of a marketplace, what would your tip be?
I think the key thing is to get a USP, right? To understand what is an additional criterion or additional feature I could add to my product that people don't have in the market, but are sort of looking for, or it's very easy to convince people to realize that your product is better because it has this additional feature, right? So I think for the stretch mark cream, for example, for us, people weren't looking for a stretch mark cream with aloe vera, but aloe vera was a trending ingredient and people were looking for it for other products. So when they were looking for aloe vera, they would see, oh, there's actually also a stretch mark cream with aloe vera. When they were looking for stretch mark cream, they saw, oh, hey, there's actually a stretch mark cream with aloe vera, right? I think you need to do something that resonates immediately with people. If you use another ingredient that does the same thing, but people don't know about, it's going to be an uphill battle. That's what we did with some other products and it didn't work as well, right? So I think thinking through a USP that will immediately resonate with people and even people are maybe already looking for it, then that will be a really strong way to sell in the market.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So one of the things that I always tell my team is this like 10% better ethos. And I come a little bit more on just like not the FMCG, but the marketplace, kind of like growth hacking, almost like Amazon side of the world. And the way we look at it is like, you know, if we're going to come up with a new brand or a new product and we're going to launch that, we're not going to win for very long if we just take an existing product that's being manufactured in China. Like there's no moat there. So how can we be 10% better with product design, right? And, you know, the market size tells us what's addressable, but we also look at like the incumbents' reviews, right? So just seeing like, you know, what are some of the detractors saying? And is there anything in that review that we can use to like increase the quality of our product development and kind of de-risk things a little bit? So, you know, when you're doing new product development, it seems extremely data driven compared to most brands in Southeast Asia, from my experience. What are some of the things you're looking at?
As you said, for sure, we start from the market size, right? And another thing we do is really sort of customer needs, right? So we look at what's out there in the market, where is there significant like market size, but we also go to consumer and ask them, well, what is a product that you don't have yet? What is an issue currently that is important for you, right? What are your biggest issues and what product are you using for that? And then we sometimes find out, oh, they're using a product that's not dedicated to the issue they're having. And maybe if you make a product specifically for that, it will do well. That's basically what the two angles we start off with, right? And then we make product concepts and we test them again and refine them based on that, right? We ask them, would you buy this? Why not? What would be the price you would be feeling to pay for that, right? We do like fun Western door analysis always. We ask them, what would you find a good price for this? What would you find too expensive? At what price would you find it expensive, but you would still buy? What would you find a price that's too cheap? So that then gives us sort of a pricing understanding and we can compare to what's in the market and what price do they have. And then we can kind of see if people were willing to pay more for our product than what's already on the market. And that gives us another data point if we're onto something or not. But the proof is in the pudding in the end, right? Like often the data tells us one thing and then reality once we launch is a bit different. But I think we did better than people who didn't do all of this. So we have a bigger chance of our product succeeding because we're very data driven, right? And we're going beyond what's just given from like Shopee and Lazada sales data by really doing our own customer research.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think, you never get it right 100% of the time. If anyone says they do, they're they're fluffing up their ego, but you can definitely de-risk it quite a bit. And I think what you've built is really, really impressive, Duri. I'm just running through the Mama's Choice Singapore store now. And one thing that sticks out to me is that most of your products are kind of small. I mean, you do have the baby food maker, which looks like it's a little bit larger, but are you deliberately looking at smaller products because you're using D2C e-commerce as your primary sales channel?
I would say our anchor was really the FMCG products, right? So we have what we call accessories and gears as well, but accessory and gears was more to make a bigger basket size possible, right? But as you said, you cannot just do products that are produced in China and make them slightly better, right? And make them a cooler color. That's not a long-term market position. So our long-term differentiation is that we have our own original products like the stretch mark cream or the stretch mark serum or the baby rash cream, which is also pretty cool. And we have a lot of these products, right, that are really differentiated, that have our original formula, that are our own IP. And then we built other products around them, right? But our core anchor products are FMCG products, right? And therefore, the additional products we added are more like accessories around those products, like the things you need for breastfeeding, like a breastfeed cover or a pump or a storage bottle, than like, let's say, a stroller that would be a big ticket item, right? And I think the second thing is also we are mostly operating in developing countries. And we're VC funded. So our company is VC funded. So we need to have big market share. We can't just be a small for-profit company, right? It's more about getting really, really big and then making it profitable, right? So if you want to have a lot of volume in markets like Indonesia and so on, you can only do the smaller items as well, right? Because purchasing power is just low. Not everybody in Indonesia owns a stroller, but they need a feeding bottle. They need a rash cream, right? So that's what we're focusing on.
So you've been in this game for 8 years now on the marketplace side, and then now the brand side. It's changed a little bit. Definitely, the stack has evolved. The seller centers are very different in Shopee and Lazada, but it's kind of the two core players, Tokopedia in Southeast Asia, TikTok's kind of entered. What do you think e-commerce in Southeast Asia is going to look like in the future? Like any, projections or ideas of, where this thing's headed in the next couple of years?
I have theories, right? I wouldn't claim I know better than others. And I think it can go in many ways, right? I think we will see a bit the development you had in China, right? With TikTok selling, with a lot of small micro nano influencer reselling and presenting products. And so you will go away a bit from these mega influencers holding a product next to their face and doing one picture and then sales explode, to more like people who really care about the product, explaining it in live streams and so on, their followers asking questions and selling like that. I think that's one thing we will see. The second thing, I'm not sure if you will see that, right? If potentially there is going to be more sales via the .coms of the brands, individual D2C versus marketplaces. I could see this happening because people get more loyal to the individual brands and the brands have enough funding to give incentives to buy via their own website. Also, e-commerce platforms have to charge more and more commission because they have pressure on their margins. And then it becomes more reasonable to do more sales via our own website, right? So I feel the brands are pushing there because of the commission and everything increasing and the data sharing decreasing from the big e-commerce platforms. But I'm not sure if it's really going to happen or the consumer is just too comfortable with the big platforms. I mean, in the end, in the West, it's also most people still buy on Amazon and not on brand.com, right? But currently still in the West, you make quite some volume on the brand.coms, while in Southeast Asia, most people make 80% of their volume on Lazada and Shopee.
I really appreciate your time, Duri. The last question is, where can listeners find you online?
They can definitely find our brand, right? mamaschoiceshop.com or mamaschoice.id, and they can find me on LinkedIn. I usually reply, I usually accept. That's probably the easiest one. And yeah, just reach out.
Okay, thanks again, Duri. I appreciate it. Listeners, we'll put all of Duri's contact information and, of course, links to Mama's Shop Mama's Choice inside of the show notes. Thanks for listening. That's a wrap.